Welcome to this week's Two Men in the Middle. This is where two men in the middle of the country get together and talk about politics, current events, and other fun stuff. I'm Craig Huey.
I'm Brandon Kinnick.
And I'm Jason Peterson.
Much smoother on the intro this week, guys. We had 4 people last week, and I don't think anybody we had no prearranged set, and I think we kind of stalled out there for a second.
It was a little disjointed last.
Yeah.
Eye contact isn't the same when it's on Zoom.
And something that was weird with Jason, your name did come across. So we were recording remotely, and you're like, "This is Jason," and it just totally faded out. So I had to go back to an old podcast, cut your name out of the audio, and put it in.
Oh wow, that sounded seamless. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Yeah, my engineering skills are increasing by the week.
That's what it took to get you to edit it. That's amazing.
Yeah, if we say bad stuff or stumble around, to me, that's the good stuff. That's the stuff you keep in. It's we didn't hear your name clearly. That's what we got to correct. Brandon, let's start off this week with the story of GameStop. The story that has captivated the United States this week. This is a story that has many, many layers to it. I find this story just amusing as amusing can be. I am tickled that hedge fund managers have lost billions of dollars to the Reddit crowd. What's your overall reaction to what's happening with GameStop right now?
Well, I think it has all the best elements of a great Hollywood movie, right? It's the little guy going up against the big guy. There's questions of fairness, and you see the reaction, which has caused even, the investors to dig in, the whole hold the line mantra. So I think number one, it shows the power and incredible audacity of online media to be able to bring groups of people together on something like this. This isn't going to be the last time we see this type of effort around a specific stock or company. It's going to become more and more commonplace. And so the question is, how do the big hedge funds and Wall Street bankers who value stability respond? Do they seek more regulations around this? Do they seek to kind of stifle the small-time investor who uses apps like Robinhood? Because this is really about apps like Robinhood have resulted in the democratization of investing and day trading, because it's taken away the barriers to entry for many folks, the high commissions, the fees, which is why, many average people don't invest in the stock market. And so it really has created a dividing line, right, between big hedge funds, Wall Street, and small-time investors. And yes, the big hedge funds lost all this money and they reacted the way they did. But I think story really goes to the apps and how they've been kind of cowed into stopping the trading and the backlash that they've received. I mean, the CEO of Robinhood continues to hammer his talking points that don't come across as very believable. And, he continues to face a lot of backlash over this. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not, because Robinhood is just one app, but you will likely see other apps come out of this too. You might see day traders flock to some of these other apps. And the question is, Reddit is one forum where this type of activity can take place and you can mobilize and galvanize users to take action on a specific stock, but it's not the only one.
Jason, you're really good at explaining difficult things. Can you give just a brief overview of just what's shorting, what actually is going on, and how can people make money off of this?
Okay, well, finance is not my area of expertise, but I will take a crack at it. So these large hedge fund managers and big time investors can look at the business behind a company and decide that they believe over time it's going to fail or dwindle in its value. And so they can bet on that, and they bet on that by shorting it. That's the phrase. So they're saying this stock is going to fall in value, and I'm going to bet that happens. And they have to have enough money in the bank to cover any loss if it doesn't. And so what we see here is these large investors who have betted against GameStop, which if you rewind from a year ago, it's not surprising that people would bet that this company would struggle. Their primary presence is in mall and retail space, where during a pandemic, people aren't going to be visiting those places that much anyway. Two, it's in a distribution mode of games and video games and game equipment that seems archaic in the age of Amazon and other online sources for downloading and playing video games. So people said this stock's valued too high. We're going to bet against it. They'll choose whatever number, if I understand correctly, that they think it's going to drop to. And then meanwhile, Reddit got into the game, and a month ago, at the end of December, determined that there was too many people holding short stock on GameSpot. And so there's a formula there that I don't understand real well. But if it gets over leveraged, there's too many people betting against it. Yeah. Then that's the time where somebody else who wants to try to make money on the opposite side, it benefits them to jump in. And so there are the wiser side of the Reddit financial armchair people jumped in and said, okay, these guys are wrong. We're going to drive this up. And then they collectively go into it together and pour more and more of the small time investment money into it, thereby increasing the value of the company. And now they've pitted themselves against those who shorted it. Two other things that I think here are interesting that I'd be curious if you guys want to comment on. The first one is that, the idealized version of the stock market here is that it does allow for small-time investors to choose to invest in companies for the purpose of those companies using that money to improve their business. I read something yesterday that happened actually with AMC. So American Multi-Cinema, a local company. Now they're probably a international conglomerate, but for a while anyway, it was local. They've obviously struggled. It's a movie theater chain during the pandemic. Not enough people going, not enough new theaters coming or new movies coming to theaters. They were multiple times expressing the likelihood of them going into bankruptcy, and GameSpot's the clear example here that the Reddit group went after, but AMC was another one, and there were a couple others too. And the quote that came from one of the AMC executives was, enough money poured in from this that they think they can weather the storm of the pandemic, right, and hold on to those cash reserves over time. Now, I'm not exactly clear how the paper wealth turns into actual cash assets for them to leverage, but people who are smarter in the financial world than us are presumably following that. So one, I think that's really interesting that there possibly is positive side effect to the companies that are involved in this. And then the second thing I'm really interested in is this is all paper gains, and there's a lot of people on Reddit who are now overnight multimillionaires. How long do they hold that line? At what point do they say, I could be a multimillionaire tomorrow if I sold my position?
When does your greed...
Very tempting.
When does your greed overtake your wanting to make a political or a personal or financial statement by screwing a hedge fund? I don't know. To me, that would be real short.
Well, and if you look at I was reading the Reddit forum this morning that spawned this, and there's 5 out of 7 articles are probably people encouraging one another to hold their position to stay in. And they'll cite examples of one of their peers who lost millions of dollars yesterday because it dropped $20 or whatever, but they're staying in, so you should too. And it works when they all do that together, but at some point, somebody's going to jump, I think.
And I would say the situation is a little bit different between GameStop and AMC. They're two very different companies. As you alluded to, AMC is the largest movie theater conglomerate worldwide. And full disclosure, I worked for AMC corporate at one time. I know a little bit about how they operate. But if this allows them, the longer they hold, it does give AMC a little bit more time to weather this, because something that AMC came out and said too is that they've been able to secure more big time investors, and that's really, it's been a timing issue for them. The longer that they can hold out to be able to secure that investment, the more likely it is for them to weather this storm. GameStop is a little bit different situation that they're in as far as their liabilities and being able to attract big time investors. So two kind of very different situations, but it is interesting. The idea of shorting stocks is commonplace. It's something that goes on routinely, but at the same time, it's not something without controversy. And I think the most extreme example of that is what happened during the recession back in 2008. And anybody who saw the film The Big Short, what went on then and how it literally brought, these big financial houses down and the economic ramifications of that. It has real-time, real-day impacts. So, it's something that even though it is a part of the stock market and the American financial system, it has a lot of controversy tied to it.
And there were no regulations created then to prevent anything like this happening now. And the controversy around some of this, and you see Twitter posts from AOC and others, are should there be legislation created that even potentially outright bans shorting?
So I'll play the role of the hedge manager or the hedge fund guy here. So one of the core tenets of the stock market is to accurately value companies. That is what it's there to do. That is the reason a market exists. There's a good, there's a service, and the market collectively, based on the value of the good or service, defines what its overall value is. And what this is a complete bastardization of that process simply to try to take money or cost people money or to make people money. So the danger of this is the stock market is at an all-time high. It's the one thing that through the pandemic has continued to grow. Now you're messing with the basic fundamentals that people invest billions of dollars on every day for a Reddit joke. I get it, it's more complicated than that, but at some point, the stock market does play a specific role with assigning value. And if we're going to artificially inflate that because we're going at a hedge fund or we just want to do it to see if we can do it, that's something that's going to have to be looked at.
Well, I think the value of a company has been detached from the reality of the books for a long time. And if you look at something like Tesla, there's another example where Tesla, by and large, it seems like they make great products and they're so far more profitable than people had expected. However, the value of Tesla based off of the stock market is more than like the next 5 top car companies combined, including huge ones like GM, Ford, Volkswagen, right?
Including Toyota, who's the world's largest manufacturer and seller of cars.
And therefore, the value that the stock market puts upon Tesla doesn't really associate with the reality of the mechanics of that business. Now, does that mean that as an investor in Tesla, you're not going to make money? No, but that doesn't, if you open up the ledger of Tesla, it doesn't warrant the giant valuation that the stock market gives it.
But Tesla as a company has market potential. I think the main argument against the Reddit crowd here is there is no market fundamentals that GameStop is a viable business.
That's right.
The market has left them by. The retail is in the toilet. The game industry. I mean, my kid used to go there when he was like 9, but he hasn't stepped into a GameStop in years. So, Brandon, what's the argument to, again, this is if we're going to keep a capitalist system, these things actually damage capitalism's credibility in the long run.
They do, because I mean it is a form of distortion because it's a group of actors that are acting in concert to go against what the market trends are. But the question is, if you regulate that, like you are regulating the ability to impact the markets in many ways. So how far do you go? What
would you regulate? If you've got full regulation power, and Jason and I come to you as the government and say, we need to fix whatever's happening at GameStop. We may not understand it, but we think something's broke. What would somebody do to actually fix this?
From the standpoint of, the small time investors that are causing the
I guess that's the first thing you got to tell us is what side are you fixing it for? Because it doesn't feel like you can fix it for both.
But at the same time, that's where I struggle with this, is from a public policy standpoint, because there was so much action that has not been taken on the other side in terms of being able to prevent the type of recession that we saw in 2008. So if you just stamp down on the ability of the small investor to be able to impact this type of stock change, I don't think you can do that without putting in place restrictions on the other side.
Well, and I guess part of the question is it really broken? I mean, the system seems to be functioning as designed. It's just a crazy example that we see presented out through the math of the last week. it doesn't make sense that a company like GameStop is worth nearly as much, but there's a lot of other companies that don't make sense that they're worth that much either.
True. And you mentioned something, because we've worked in tech for a long time. Very few tech companies are started to actually be a functioning, profitable organization. You started to sell it. So you make a whole lot of decisions that are weird long-term if you are actually going to try to stay in long-term. I guess what I'm saying is, it feels like this has been coming for a while, that the stock market and business, it's just a game. It's just all on paper. To your point, how do you recognize $75 million worth of gains in stock? I'm not 100% sure. I know you sell it, you pay some taxes. I guess you get your cash. I don't know. But I think people have seen the stock market and business now as so divorced from actually what makes a product and makes a company viable. Nobody's trying to build the next IBM. So has this all just kind of caught up to us at this point?
Well, and Wall Street hasn't resembled Main Street in many decades. And to Jason's point, what we saw transpire over the last couple of days is that different in terms of the valuation craziness we've seen at other times in American history. I think a good example, think back to the 90s with the tech boom and bust. There are many of those emerging tech companies that were way overvalued and had not delivered, had underdelivered if they had delivered at all. And then all of that came crashing down. So, there's a function of this that's kind of, endemic to American stock markets.
Well, and so much of it is based off of faith. I mean, if you look at the US dollar anyway, it was divorced from the gold standard decades ago, and the value is what people want it to be. So to me, some of that projects to the market.
And we keep, and going to the value of the dollar, all we do and have done now for decades is just print more money. And that's how we sustain the current system. We just continually print money. So the question is, talk about, overvaluation and, expectations.
And it gets to how many finances this massive industry of people who don't really do anything. They don't produce anything. They just make money by moving stuff around. And what it looks like to the average investor is that they've rigged it in such a way that they've took all of the risk out of it. And if you really screw the pooch, the government will bail you out. That's what happened in 2008 when they tried to bring down or almost brought down the global economy through the housing market crisis. So I understand certainly the public sentiment that there is absolutely nobody wants to give this more than the initial thought of, hey, some rich guy's getting screwed. I'm all for that. Let's go. But I think there's a few bigger, more serious concepts at play here. Let's jump to the end of this. This only ends one way. The bubble burst, and the vast majority of people who are not out of this already just lose a ton of money. There's no other way. Bubbles burst all the time. That's what's going to happen. If you bought GameStop today, you're probably going to get screwed.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Unless there's in some idealized business world where the CEO of GameStop comes out and says, hey, we've just accumulated all this cash because of this. Here's what we're going to do to make our business relevant and, grow in the next decade. And I don't see how that happens. But
so the CEO of GameStop puts a master plan together and launches a streaming service out of GameStop that revolutionizes the gaming industry with the $30 billion worth of cash they raised through here.
Then the lul's all on us.
That would be the only exception. Yeah. Major business strategy shift.
I think, while that could happen, I think what's more likely is in a couple of months, this bubble burst, everybody loses a bunch of money, and the hedge funds guy what do they call them? Retail investors or non-sophisticated investors. This isn't a place for you. You don't need to be here. And they try to teach the market a lesson, perhaps, by using GameStop.
Well, and to your point, is there something deeper underneath this? Is there a broader market implication if this thing implodes? Does the sky high valuations of the entire industry of even technology implode? Does the stock market crash? Is this just some sort of early indicator of people are losing faith in what the monetary system associated with the stock market looks like?
And is everybody a day trader? I mean, where did these people come from? Brandon, how much of this do you think is the pandemic and stimulus checks? I read some article where some billionaire from New York was bitching, stop giving these people at home money. You're giving them money. They're all sitting around bored. This is the shit they're dreaming up. Stop doing it. How much of that do you think just the pandemic and people being in front of the computer has to do with what the Reddit crowd is doing?
Partially. I mean, apps like Robinhood have been around for a decade or so, and they've really democratized day trading. And then you couple the pandemic on top of that, where people have all of this free time now. And I think many people, if in a traditional economy, a traditional society, when there are plenty of things going on, you don't necessarily have time to day trade, or it's not of interest. Now, when everybody has nothing to do, it's like, oh, here's something to do. And so there has been a correlation with the rise in the use of apps like Robinhood and others. So that has something to do with it.
Well, and we are talking about Reddit. People are trying to prescribe some deep reasoning behind it. And it could just be they're doing it for the hell of it.
They saw a meme.
Yeah.
I think that's legitimately it. They saw a meme and somebody said, let's take a big bite out of some rich guy's ass. And they said, sweet, I'm up for that.
And then you have people that pile on like Elon Musk who encourage it because, he has a vendetta against people that short. So, I think that only encourages this, and it brings even more exposure.
Guys, I'm telling you, after a year of sitting in my basement alone, working, staring at the same four walls for almost a year, I could be I am much more susceptible to being manipulated by a Reddit meme right now than maybe at any point in time in my life. And then if you mix in the end of that, there could be money at the end. Oh, yeah.
Get your popcorn bowl out.
I'll figure. This sounds like something we can do.
And to your point, and again, this is a little bit of a tangent, but in a similar way, that's why people have been susceptible to online conspiracy theories like QAnon and these others that spread through message boards, because people are sitting at home, they're isolated, they're bored, they're struggling. And so there's something to be said that there's more susceptibility to buy into something like this because people are looking for anything and everything to escape. And so you provide that in whatever form.
And is this just a new flavor of the culture war at this point? I mean, we're in full out culture war, I feel like, right now. I can't think of, and I'll just say for me personally, I've never experienced a time where I have more distrust of people I don't know. And I think everybody is different than me than right now in the United States. And this feels like just another example of
us versus them.
I know these guys are all corrupt. They manipulate the system. I can lose money in the system. They can't. This feels like part of what's driving of this is this culture war. It's right on point for more of us versus them. And I'm mad at you, Brandon, because you have something more than I do. And I assumed you had to lie, cheat, and steal to get it. That's why I don't have it. And that feeds into my, I want to now get back at you in some way that I can.
Oh, absolutely. It feeds into the narrative that there are the elites and there's everybody else, and the elites have designed a system that is built to support them and fail everybody else. And so this fits right into that narrative. And I actually refer to it as us versus us rather than us versus them, because it's Americans versus Americans. And it reinforces the polling that came out just after the first of the year that showed for the first time in like 50 years of polling, when Americans were asked to rank the greatest threats to our country, including international threats, international terrorism, they ranked other Americans number one, 54%, as the greatest threat to the United States.
That's so depressing, because that's the thing that we should be able to control, right?
Right.
You said that on your Minute Pod last week. I've not stopped thinking about that. And you had a really good Grant quote at the end that escapes me at this point. What was the Grant quote?
Oh, gosh. I can't.
I thought you had that. Damn it. We should have rehearsed that one.
He's so good. He had it on the fly during his recording.
My fault. That's my bad. I should have given you the heads up on that.
Well, yeah, it was a really great Grant quote because it spoke to themes of division and turning against each other. It was about the new Mason-Dixon line, that the next Mason-Dixon line that would, divide Americans. Would it be on the issue of slavery, but it would be kind of similar themes of fear. And I'll try to dig up that quote.
It's really good. I actually had a listener text it to me and say, I really like this quote. But this is again where this is just another branch of the culture war. It's just a new ground to fight on, but the issues are all still the same. Grievance, left behind, you have more than me.
Tribalism.
We just took it and applied it into a different spot.
If we make it through this, there'll be a really interesting history book to read.
The phrase is, the winner writes the history book.
Yeah. Here's the quote, by the way. I found it. So Grant had said, if we were to have another contest in the near future of our national existence, I predict that the dividing line will not be Masons and Dixons, but between patriotism and intelligence on one side and superstition, ambition, and ignorance on the other.
So Grant is never really given any due in history for being an intellectual.
Right. And he's probably one of our most underrated presidents.
Yes, most of the time he's just portrayed as a drunk a lot of the time. So he was spot on with that one. It's like he was looking into a glass that showed him 175 years in the future, and he seemed to nail that.
By the way, plug if you have not seen the Grant miniseries, History Channel, that was produced by Leonardo DiCaprio. Highly recommend. It came out over the summer. It got a lot of buzz, and it looks at Grant through kind of a new lens, a new perspective. His reputation was downgraded in the early 20th century intentionally by Southern sympathizers that saw him as an obstacle because he was very heavy into Reconstruction, requiring the South to meet benchmarks, do away with polling taxes, equal opportunity for African Americans. He's the one that actually helped create the Department of Justice, send in federal agents into the South. So he was despised by the South. It was during his tenure as president that Southern senators were actually expelled. One of the last times in American history that we had members of Congress expelled from being seated because of their sympathies and their support of the Confederacy. But he has much to admire and like about his tenure. There was some issues over some corruption with some members of his cabinet, which he got attached to. But overall, very interesting presidency and something to look back on.
And you said that was the History Channel?
History Channel. It's called Grant. So if you just, that's the name of
it's
the
probably
series.
not any of the 87 streaming services I have.
No. So, Jason, you recently finished one of my absolute favorite books. And we had a small text exchange this week. I would love to talk a little bit about the book. Why don't you introduce the book, the author, and kind of what your takeaways were?
Sure. Okay. So the book is called Suicide of the West, and it's by Jonah Goldberg, who you told me today is actually also a podcaster and has a podcast called The Remnant.
The Remnant.
Yep. And I think he has a column in LA Times too.
The G File is his file. Yep.
Okay. And he has written a couple other books. I think they've all been New York Times bestsellers, but this is the only one that I've read. And it starts out as kind of a history lesson around capitalism and how it came to be. And then there are numerous lessons that he tries to draw through a lot of evidence and footnotes and historical correlation. But one of them is the fragility of capitalism and how with the lack of appreciation that the average American has towards the uniqueness of our time, both as a country and a culture within not just democracy, but capitalism and where we sit in the space of time and history, how we can lose it. And the reason why we don't want to lose it, all the great things that it has done, not just for Americans, but the entire world, and how it's really unprecedented when compared to the rest of history. So that's one thing. And he gets into tribalism and, how in some cases tribalism is missed if people are now going through life without a church or a men's group or scouts or whatever it is that they associate with their fellow man and group where they can ideate with one another and learn from one another.
All that social fabric.
Yeah, social fabric. That's a good phrase.
Right now.
It's tearing apart right now, and how damaging that is, and how, as a culture, we're not really talking about that as being something that is changing. So it is a dense read. It's filled with facts, figures, history. And it took me some time, but it was fascinating, and I'm still thinking about it. And
So this is one of my favorite books, and I'm an audiobook person just because it's easier for me to do that way. So I listen to Suicide of the West at least once a year.
Wow.
And my favorite, I have two favorite analogies out of that book. One, do you remember the chapter on the stable bandit theory of government?
Refresh my memory.
The stable bandit theory of government is that, when humans stopped living in caves and started building villages and farming, there were a group of them that said, this is really hard. And what we should do, instead of trying to grow our own food, I'll just walk over and steal Jason's. So while while humans were starting to form civilizations around agriculture and stop roaming around and being more stationary, there was another group of humans that just roamed around stealing things. That's how they made their living. And what they found out over time is, well, when we roll into Brandon's village and kill everybody and steal everything and leave it in disarray, well, when we come back next year, well, there's no village left. We've been so successful at this, we've killed off our own supply. So one day they roll into a village and say, this is pretty nice. We're not going to loot it and burn it. We're just going to stay. And we're just going to stay and tell these people we're in charge and we're going to eat your food and do your stuff. And we're going to hit you with a stick or something if you don't like that, till eventually everybody just goes along with it. And then they got really clever. After they did that for several thousand years, then they came up with this idea, well, God wants us here. I mean, this is the foundation of a monarchy. It is from God that my family has been chosen to lead you folks. And then monarchy turns into other forms of government. So for years, I've wondered, where does the conservative stance on that government is a bad thing in all instances? Grover Norquist, the government should be no bigger than what you can drown in a bathtub. Ronald Reagan, the worst things anybody can say to you is, I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help. Where does that come from? If you see the government as a bandit that just didn't leave, you can make that stretch. And Brandon, Jonah Goldberg is a deep thinking conservative. That seems incredibly out of fashion right now.
I mean, he's somewhat of a minority now on the right. He's somebody I've always admired, and I follow him on social media. And so I'm really encouraged to read this book now. But yes, I mean, he's an intellectual. He thinks about policy and about ideology in a way that is out of vogue right now in the modern Republican Party. Needless to say, even the whole idea about government being bad has been turned upside down, because you had, the new class of Trump conservatives who embraced big government when it suited them during the Trump era.
This is a good point.
So, and all aspects of that, right? So we're living in a very different time. And Jonah Goldberg is one of, probably more a historian than most, because he's that link between conservatism's past and, the vein of conservatism that goes back to Buckley and others, where there was really an adherence to principle and intellectual curiosity, and about ways that you could adapt these tenets to modern society and make them appreciated by others. And so we're kind of beyond that now. And it's too bad, because I think that the conservatism, the type that Goldberg espouses, free market forces and being able to lift up the individual and opportunity society, which is something Jack Kemp spoke about. There's nobody speaking to that now. You don't have the Republicans speaking to it, and the Democrats are definitely not speaking to it.
And you just said it, the power of the individual, the power of individual choice, individual freedom. I think the thesis of this book is when you couple that with an economic system like capitalism, good stuff happens. And you can't have this without individual liberty and individual freedom. And that's a topic that the Dems seem to just completely have abandoned.
Democrats don't talk about that at all right now. Mm-mm. It's a shame, too, because that seems to be one way to appeal to the middle. If you can find the way to balance the individual with the balance being picked up by the government and not all swinging one way or the other, you've just captured probably the majority of the country.
The other analogy in that book that I really, really like, and this is at the beginning, where Brandon, Jason, and I, we're aliens. And our job as aliens is every 25,000 years, we have to check up on this dirt ball called Earth. So as aliens, we live forever. Our lifespan is infinite. So we fly by Earth every 25,000 years, and we make a simple report. People walking around, they're living in caves, they're scratching in some dirt. That's about it. And for 10 trips, for 250,000 years, we give the exact same report. Everyone's just living in a cave, eating dirt, throwing rocks at each other, nothing really here to see. Then we show up on our next trip, and we went to the Super Bowl. It's like, wait a minute, what just happened? And I think people don't understand. And I like this part of the book because it links evolutionary biology into some more modern themes. but we are at the infancy of who we are as a species. And we've just started organizing ourselves in complex ways. And this
it would
is
be
step
so
one.
Easy to go backwards.
True. But
to a guy drawn in the dirt with a stick.
Very true. But also, too, we don't know what's ahead because we're on step 2 of a 100-step evolution process. And I think people forget. I think they think this is the pinnacle of what the human existence is going to be. We've only used our brain for like 4,000 years. We're standing at the beginning. And if we screw it up so bad now, what's that path going to be like moving forward? Are we going to short circuit our long-term potential because we can't get out of this infant stage where we're fighting with each other and personal grievance and what we want personally is the only thing that we're centered on?
Well, and something you've commented on in the past podcasts is around how this document that we all love and believe in has been unchanged for so long, and there's a huge section of society that's unwilling to even tweak it, even though times change, people change, laws get bent, new things are learned, whatever, and even the discussion of tweaking it is controversial.
Well, and it's interesting because the irony of that is that Thomas Jefferson himself, during his time, spoke about the dangers of those that looked at the Constitution with almost like deity status. He's like, no, this is a document and it will need to be changed in time to reflect modern society. And that was something Jefferson said. And you have some on the right now that look at it that it should never be changed and no matter what. And we haven't had any amendments to it in well over 30 years now. Yeah, 1992 was the last time the Constitution was amended.
What was the last constitutional amendment, Brandon?
So the last constitutional amendment had to do with members of Congress and being able to vote on their own pay. And so it basically said that members of Congress cannot vote to increase their own salaries for their session of Congress, that any vote on increasing members' salary would not go into effect until the next Congress so that they could be held accountable by the American voter.
And didn't we learn from Mike that the ERA was one of the last ones that almost passed?
Was that in the 70s or 80s?
That was the 70s, yeah, because the ERA went so the way that they tried to pass ERA is because you can go for a constitutional amendment
or state by
voted
state
by the states versus state by state and get enough state legislatures to ratify. So it went the state legislature route, and it came very close. I think at this point it's missing just 2 states. And it came very close in the 70s. And then you had the reactionary movement that came about that, did it in. But yeah, that was one of the last big movements on a state-by-state basis.
And now it feels impossible to change that document.
Right. Based on our current politics and the polarization.
So what you just said is it should be blatantly obvious to any American that we need to go back and correct the parts of the Constitution that were tied to the time it was created that exclude anybody but white men. Doesn't that seem like, wow, that should just be, it's 2021. We haven't done that yet? I mean...
Well, and again, even the founders...
We can't throw the ladies in there a little bit?
Right. The founders were self-aware enough to know that when they were doing that this was likely not going to hold, like they would have to be changed. And they knew that at the time there were so many compromises made. I mean, the fights that happened over the Constitution, were very strong and very animated. And they realized that, likely down the line that, this is going to have to be changed by future political leaders. And that hasn't happened. So it's just, again, it's ironic that even at the time and for the time, the founders knew that likely this was going to change. But yet here we are, and it still hasn't happened.
I've told this joke on the pod before, but Joe Rogan, if Thomas Jefferson walked through a time machine, the first thing he'd say is, "You're still running the original doc? I wrote that shit with a feather 250 years ago. You should be on version 7 by now." That's how, what, to your point, when did this document become almost a religious document that now is not to be touched? I don't think anybody ever intended that to be how that happened.
No, not at all. And that's why the amendment process was written in right at the time it was being crafted, because they immediately saw the need to correct some things right off the bat.
So what would it take to get conservatives who are traditional in their thinking, and that's wrong. I don't want to label somebody as traditional, but somebody who is at least looking to apply some consistent conservative values like Jonah Goldberg, what does it take to get him back in favor? What would, Brandon, if you're the king of all Republicans, the Republican Party runs through you, you wave the magic wand, things happen. What would it take to get the Republicans to accept him back? Because what I like listening about Jonah Goldberg and Charlie Sykes, these are conservative people who have actually lost opportunity based on their principles. Right. When they decide, Charlie Sykes, when he decided he was a never Trumper, he got kicked off a very successful radio show he ran. So these are people who have, Jonah Goldberg talks about it. He's lost all kinds of financial opportunities and friends and relationships and all of that stuff. That's how bad this has gotten. What is the path to take somebody like those two guys who are intelligent, articulate, and that you need, and to see them as a resource again?
Well, ultimately, it's going from being a party of personality to a party of ideas. And as long as you have the specter of Trump hanging over the party and you continue to have up through the next elections candidates that align themselves as, Trump Republicans versus not, we're not going to return to those times because those intellectual debates are not happening within the party now. They're all happening outside the party. They're all happening among the conservative intelligentsia, like the names you mentioned, who are no longer within the party itself and are in demand. They are operating from outside the party. None of those discussions are happening in the party. The party debates have become about almost gamified, Democrat versus Republican and scoring political points on a day-to-day basis. They're not really issue-based because the issues change based on the personality changing. You're against stimulus payments one day until Trump is for them the next, and then you're for them, and then you want to, dig in and say, Democrats don't support them now. They're against the American people. It's all about, gaming the other side. So you have to do away with the personality politics that has really invaded and caused the corrosion within the party. You can't have those debates again until that happens.
Too much politics and not enough policy. A couple episodes ago, we talked about one way to do this would be more direct democracy. Barring that, election reform, right? How we elect our representatives and how long they get to stay there and how they raise money to get in there.
Ted Cruz, 2 weeks ago, Brandon, started talking about term limits out of the blue. Do you remember that?
I did, yeah.
For what purpose? I'm not 100% sure. My only thought was maybe he was trying to guarantee people I won't be here long. I don't know what that was about, but any kind of large scale plumbing change to the government, that seems to be like a total pipe dream that would never happen at this point.
Which feels like that's what's needed.
Yeah. Well, and I think term limits would have to, at this point, come from, again, a national referendum. And you have to get that process in place first because many members of Congress, 1990s through 2000s, ran on term limits. That was like a conservative mantra. And time again, once elected, they would go back on that promise. And that happened over and over and over again. And there is no upside to running on term limits at this point because you limit your ability to advance. And we're now at a time when members of Congress are focused on building up their personal brands. It's not about policy. It's about my own personal brand and how many likes I can get on social media and how many shares I get and being in the news as often as possible. So it's not about accomplishing anything. And the problem is if you term limit yourself, then your personal brand stalls, your speaking engagements stall, the funding streams and the profit channels also stall.
Yeah, it just, we used the word a couple of weeks ago, obsolete, that everything in the government right now feels obsolete. And the fact that Leahy, who is going to preside over Trump's impeachment trial, he's 81.
Is he the oldest serving Democrat now?
I wish. Oh, Democrat. No, that's Feinstein. She's 87. Yeah. Grassley's 88. Feinstein's 87. Leahy's 81, right. I believe.
Yeah, because Grassley's been in the Senate for 48 years. I think Leahy's been in for over 50 years in the Senate. Yeah.
I thought all of this technology and all this advancement would mean that my generation, when I turned like 55, I was hoping I would get booted out of the workplace. My dream is like in 2 years, somebody just calls me and says, we've just decided you're too old and we don't need you anymore. And there's this government program. That would be perfect. The analogy I'm trying to make is, Brandon, your generation, I think, feels this the most. People just won't get out of the way. No. And we're just going to have to start.
And it limits opportunities for other generations. And I have heard this, and it's not just in politics and in government, it's in all sectors of the economy. I have friends who have been stuck in positions because they can't advance because there is an 80 or 90-year-old who refuses to retire, who's still making money, who are in some of these higher up positions.
There's nothing worse than seeing somebody in their 70s who is still working every day who doesn't need to. Right. It's a different form of tragedy if you're in your 70s and you have to work to survive. Right. But if you're just working there to work, I might suggest you've done something wrong in your life, that you haven't found something outside of work that you feel passionately enough that you couldn't give up working.
Well, and then with government, you're talking about power too.
Yeah.
They don't want to give up. It's not just having something to do, and it's not just money. It's the ultimate power.
The three of us have never been in a position where nobody in our lives will tell us when we're wrong. Am I right on that? I know I certainly have never
daily.
Been. Daily.
And that's the difference between in government. What was it, Henry Kissinger, who said power is the ultimate aphrodisiac?
Well, it's just, I think to your point, once you get used to it, you're just not willingly going to give that up. So if we end our I want to pivot to talk about Trump a little bit and the impeachment. But on one side, we were talking about Jonah Goldberg and intellectual conservative thinkers. And now we've got folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's running around in Congress, who Cori Bush, the new congresswoman from St. Louis, basically requested her office to be moved away from her because she doesn't feel safe around her. This woman, for the past 2 or 3 years, a series of videos have popped up with her just saying the stupidest, dumbest, craziest, just not even worth repeating. It's just so stupid.
I mean, she's embraced every major conspiracy theory from
everyone,
calling Sandy Hook and Stoneman Douglas school shootings and Las Vegas false flag operations, saying the students themselves were paid actors, to actually going around. It was just a couple years ago, she was harassing David Hogg, who was fighting for gun control, one of the students, and she was caught on camera doing that. So, and the Jewish laser beam. I mean, every crazy conspiracy theory. I was
going to say, when you're a conspiracy theorist, when you're still running around saying Jews control the weather. Right. I mean, you haven't updated your conspiracy since like the 50s. I mean, at least QAnon's modern, but that one, it's like, come on, lady.
Well, so the scary thing to me is I think she actually believes a lot of this.
100%.
If you look at her comments throughout the couple of years, this isn't just giving lip service. This is actual conversations she's had with people online where she goes into detail. Like, she believes this, and she's in Congress now. And she's trying to create a national profile for herself so she can run for higher office. So again, it's the splintering of the Republican Party. And as I said, you can't have a Republican Party where you have Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and then you also have Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger and some of these others. That's just not sustainable. Something's got to give, and the party is going to have to choose.
Jason, Trump has shown an amazing amount of discipline since the 6th. He hasn't opened his stank hole 1 minute. Apparently, a lawyer must have finally got to him and said, you've got so much jeopardy here, I can't even explain it. You just need to sit down and shut up. But maybe he hasn't felt the need to because the rest of the Republican Party is still pushing his message for him.
I think the last couple of weeks have shown his support amongst Republicans is probably even deeper than we thought, because, a day after the 6th, it looked like it was going to be shook to the core, and now we see it wasn't. So there's reports of people coming to meet him now in Mar-a-Lago and going out with who knows what instruction he's given them. They're still his lapdog.
Like leaders of the Republicans in Congress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Senate Minority Leader, right?
That, again, see no problem with having a picture for him in Mar-a-Lago, which basically that place looks like a total disastrous dump, doesn't it? It just looks weird. But you would think Kevin McCarthy would have a little bit more political savvy about him not to have that picture, or he's made the calculation, this is the way the wind's still blowing, and that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Sorry, not Senate Minority Leader.
Yeah,
House Minority Leader.
Well, I think you understate McCarthy's dumbness. I mean, he's not known for being a very intelligent member of Congress. He has built his career.
He's no Louis Gohmert.
Right. He's built his career on relationships and having this affable, like, aw shucks persona. But he is not one who is very smart or intelligent on any level. So he's gone from within days of the insurrection, polling his members on asking Trump to resign and saying that Trump bared responsibility, to saying that Trump did not incite the riots and making his pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago to get Trump's support, even after Trump called him a pretty derogatory term.
What did he call him?
A pussy.
Oh.
I mean, it was so you have that, basically going on, and you have other Republicans that are following. And don't mistake Trump's silence on social media either for the fact that he's not doing things behind the scene. Trump has his PAC still, and by all accounts, he is funneling massive amounts of dollars into that PAC to raise money to mount primary challenges against the 10 Republicans in the House that voted for his impeachment. And Liz Cheney is number one on his list. Everybody says that he is so consumed now with her and getting her out of office that is all he's talking about to people that meet with him.
Well, and there was a brief moment there where influential Republicans seemed to have an alternative voice, like McConnell. And, we've all been faked because he's now completely silent on this after his little trial balloon.
Bringing the impeachment forward.
When he had said prior that impeachment was justified.
Brandon, in 1985, I just picked that year out of random. If Matt Gaetz would have went and held a rally against Liz Cheney in Wyoming, what would have happened to Matt Gaetz in the Republican Party?
So back then, he would have been stripped of all of his committee assignments. He would have probably been censored on the House floor. I mean, that was unheard of back then. I mean, that just wasn't done. Nobody did that. And he would have lost support from the House fundraising arm. So the House Republican Campaign Committee, they would not have supported him financially. So there would have been a series of actions that would have taken place if that would have happened back then.
And that's not really a thought exercise. He actually did that this week.
He did that.
He actually did that. He's in his second term in Congress, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And he took on the number 3 in his own party.
Yeah.
Who has the last name of Cheney. I think in 1985, Dick Cheney just would have had him killed. That would have been my thought, that Cheney just would have. I mean, he shot that one
Dick
dude
Cheney
in the face.
would have probably invited him to go hunting. Say, let's smooth this over on a hunting trip.
You don't need that orange vest.
But the thought of even doing that, Jason, doesn't that? I mean, that just lets you know where we are. What? I mean, that's ridiculous.
We talk about unity across the aisle with different parties. It's not even existing here. I mean,
can you have unity with Marjorie Taylor Greene?
That'd be tough.
It'd be really, really, really tough. Yeah.
Peter Meyer, who is one of the congressmen that voted for impeachment, I had quoted him on my Minute Pod about because he said that he believes that there will be an assassination attempt on one of them. He also came out this last week and said that if the worst thing that comes out of the insurrection is that, Liz Cheney is ostracized and demoted and loses her position, that will say volumes about where the party is today.
Yeah.
How does that impact a moderate voice like Romney?
If you're Romney, what can you do? There's not enough people to put together a middle-of-the-road coalition in the Republican Party. You're not really even sure who you want to reach out with on the Dem side. I think there's nobody more secure in their legacy or who they are or reelectable in their state than Mitt Romney. Yeah. He has carte blanche to do whatever he wants, and I still think if I were him, I don't know where to put the foot down. Are we going with this Marjorie Greene and Moberg? Is that
he's not going?
Is that the party? I mean, Mitt Romney is a loyal Republican soldier, or he wants to be a loyal Republican soldier. You're just not giving him anything to gravitate to right now.
But he's one of the few that seems to have a heart and a set of morals that.
But does he have any influence and impact?
No.
I think that's the
He's
problem.
Kind of an island of one right now. Yeah, that's the issue.
The three of us like Mitt Romney. I think to maybe folks a few years younger than us, he's just an old white guy from Utah who's a senator. I don't think they understand or appreciate what he's trying to do, what he's done, and the forces he's fighting against. And he's going to lose.
I hope not.
I don't see what's the path where the Mitt Romneys of the world come out of the Republican Party on top.
next election, more like him get elected.
Let's make some 2022 predictions already. At the beginning of the week, I would have predicted in 2022 the Democrats wipe the Republicans off the face of the planet and, again, get their gains, take back what they lost in the House with gains. We cement ourselves in the Senate. And really after 2022, it becomes really about what's Kamala Harris's role. And are we promoting her as president or not? That may be a vast overreach on my part.
Well, there's a lot of redistricting that can happen now with the census, right? And tremendous influence can be wrought with that.
True, because Republicans hold the majority of state houses and are going to be drawing those lines. So that's going to have some type of impact. And it's just we're so far out. And the question is whether or not the splintering of the Republican Party continues to happen. If so, that could mitigate even the redrawing of districts. And whether or not there is some type of third-party movement. What's interesting is David Jolly, who's a former Republican congressman from Florida, anti-Trumper. So he came out recently and said he's teasing the idea, thinking about running for Senate, right? Was it Senate?
As an independent?
Well,
yes, as an independent.
And what I loved about that, because I think we're probably referencing the same, I think he went on with Charlie Sykes.
Yep, he was on Sykes'
And what
podcast.
I really liked about that is first he's like, I have to do a calculation of where as an independent I won't do damage.
Right.
For example, I'm not running against Rubio as an independent if I feel I'm going to split some vote and help him win. And I think he was between that or the governor. He was thinking too about challenging DeSantis, but again, he's like, I'm not going to be if a Democrat has a realistic chance in any of those races, he's like, I'm not going to run as an independent because I'm not going to sink an opportunity to get one of these folks removed. Right. I like that guy because that's an adult decision to make.
Strategic, yes.
Yes, that's how an adult should look at that.
Right.
If your goal is to get rid of Rubio, well, there's going to be multiple people lined up for this. Is going to be one of the most fascinating races of 2022 because you've got Ivanka, you've got Matt Gaetz, you've got Jolly. Florida is going to be ground
zero. Yeah,
it's
in 2022.
Just awesome.
And so that's the question, because Democrats are very disorganized in Florida, have been for a number of years. They don't have the party infrastructure and ground game. They have not been able to win a statewide race since 1994 in Florida. And, and their comebacks for Senate have been blunted. There is a possibility there if he can work with the Democrats on something and run as a unifying standard bearer with the support, get the Democrat vote as well as the anti-Trumper moderate Republican, you can beat somebody like a Rubio in Florida. But you can't otherwise. If you can't create that coalition, it's not going to happen.
And I know you've met Mark Rubio. I think at one point in time when he was in Kansas City, you spent the day with him at one point.
I did. I actually drove him and his staff in a motorcade to a speaking engagement when he was running for president.
Oh, I'd love to hear about that.
It was very fascinating. We had some words to say in the car about Kansas and what was going on. But yeah, I was a big fan. I was basically supporting Marco Rubio, John Kasich in the primaries, and we saw how that turned out. And then I've since soured on Rubio with the way he's gone, as so many others have in the party.
Can he defend that seat in Florida? I don't know, because he's
in
going
the
to
primary against Idaho. That's going to be so tough.
Because he's going to get it from multiple sides.
So, and he was interviewed recently on Fox News, and I think it was, Chris Wallace. And so he was questioned on the primary threat from Ivanka Trump, and he squirmed and he was so uncomfortable, and he hemmed and he hawed. And then he finally said, Ivanka is, great. Ivanka is a U.S. And then he stopped mid-thought and he completely switched to touting his own record. It was the strangest thing. It was almost robotic, where it's almost like he had like a memory freeze and then he just pivoted to the different statement.
For one brief instant, the part of his brain that is still a rational functioning human wanted to say Ivanka Trump is a joke and her running for Senate is a joke. And I am so pissed that I'm a two-time senator and I'm going to get primary.
And he has to shower praise on her because he can't criticize her either.
Because if I say any of this stuff that makes sense, you people will turn on me for some reason. That's what he wanted to say. He just caught himself in time, so he didn't say it.
Yeah, it's very telling. It's going to be the fight of his political life. And so it's an opening there because if he somehow makes out that primary, he is bruised and beaten at that point, and there's going to be a divide in the party. If he loses and you have Ivanka Trump as a nominee, it becomes a referendum on Trump. You basically have Trump on the ballot.
How do you run against somebody? So Brandon and I are running for office together. Brandon can launch any attack on me he wants. He can call me any name, bring up. He has no restrictions. Brandon's dad funds everything I do. So I can tell you, well, Brandon sometimes is mean to me at work. That's the worst thing I can say about Brandon. This is the situation Rubio finds himself in.
Yeah.
He's fighting for his life in a primary that he can't throw a single punch because as soon as he hits the golden child, he's done.
Exactly.
And nobody deserves it more than Mark Rubio. You used the term chef's kiss the other day. I'd like to just please, if there's a political God in heaven, let this happen. Gates, Ivanka, Rubio, three-way runoff. Have at it.
Well,
and let's start it right now.
And Rubio is kind of a political joke in Florida now because he has completely acquiesced and capitulated on a host of issues in the Trump era. But then he has now just kind of resolved himself to, on social media, like uttering biblical passages, like because he won't take a stand
he
because
does it
he's
all
so
the time.
Averse to taking a stand on anything, and he's so in fear. So it's one biblical passage after another with no context, and so it's humorous.
Is it the evangelicals that he's? I mean, what is he? What's the political calculation that he's made? Because I've seen those before. They are beyond strange. Right. Is he like, hey, Trump got the evangelicals and
this is like Trump standing in front of the church holding the Bible upside down?
Is that what he's trying to emulate?
I suppose. I think that in some way he's trying to say something about what's going on. But again, he's so afraid of coming out and saying anything about the existing situation without upsetting one side or the other. So he just quotes biblical passages because nobody knows how to interpret them and they come across as bizarre and ill-timed.
You become the a-hole if you rip on him for quoting a Bible passage. Let's end with this. So, Jason, Trump has been extremely disciplined since the 6th. We haven't heard a peep out of him. Where does he pop up? Who is it with? And what does he have to say? Give me a time frame, where he goes, who he talks to, and what do you think his message is?
I think he'll be quiet until after the trial occurs or doesn't occur. And then I think you're going to see the introduction of the Patriot Party. And he'll reappear with that.
So you think he's going straight up third party?
Yep.
Okay.
I would agree with that only because as well. So Ronna McDaniel, who's the head of the RNC, who happens to be Mitt Romney's niece, which, by the way, if you want to dive into an odd family dynamic, he's super anti-Trump. She's very pro-Trump and made a calculus to morph into this pro-Trump figure. She, at Trump's request a couple years ago, removed the name Romney because she had always gone by Ronna Romney McDaniel with her married name. And Trump hated Mitt Romney so much, he asked her to remove the name Romney, and she did.
Wow.
She also, at one point, criticized her own uncle and referred to him as the junior senator from Utah and would even refer to him by name in a public statement. So people have said that they do not talk and that the family, most of the family is on Mitt's side. And so they've divided. And so she's kind of separated out from the rest of the family now, the extended family. So interesting family times there. But she recently spoke by phone and apparently is going to be making a pilgrimage to Mar-a-Lago soon. And she begged Trump not to start his own political party. And he refused he wouldn't say that he was not going to do that. He held out that possibility.
What's the way Trump can make the most people the most mad the quickest?
And probably generate the most money.
Yeah. That's a solid point. It generates
because
the
it's
most
not about
money.
the party. It's all about him. And that's what it's been since day one.
Okay, Jason, what outlet does he go on and who does he talk to? I don't know why, but I'm fascinated by that.
That's a good question. Newsmax, and I don't know the personalities on there. It's not going to be Fox News. It's not going to be Twitter.
OAN, maybe?
OAN?
See, my guess is it's Fox and it's Maria Bartiromo.
You think so?
Bartiromo.
Yeah. She has a level of insanity to her. And you can see it in her eyes. I mean, she's down for whatever. You want to come on here and spout whatever you want. We're good. She still hasn't give up the stop the steal language yet. I think, and Fox rewarded her by moving her into a primetime opinion slot.
Right.
So I think that match seems made in heaven. And I think give him a couple more weeks, let the impeachment trial, whatever, like you said, whatever that's going to be, let that pass. And I think that may be his landing point.
And Fox has kind of tried to turn back towards him the last couple weeks, right?
They let go Martha McCallum from Fox and Friends because she wasn't seen as Trumpy enough, so they're replacing her. And if in case you didn't hear, it's kind of quiet, but they fired Chris Stewart, who's their political editor of their decision desk. He was the one that made the call for Arizona. So they fired him, and he came out with a scathing op-ed about what it was like to work at Fox.
So they fired him for making the correct call.
Right. Because it enraged Trump, and Trump's people are still enraged about it.
So, Craig, if we're right and he announces the Patriot Party, how many Republicans flip towards that in the next election cycle?
So let's look at that two ways. One, current members of the House and Senate who would run for re-election under the Patriot
Instead of an R,
Party.
now it's a P next to their name.
Brandon, you know way more about this, but election law and state by state about how you get a party registered, and it's not as easy as you think. It takes time.
It takes a lot of time.
And a lot of money.
And we're less than 2 years away with the timelines in the House, so I think that's going to be very difficult for House members to do. Now, I think what you'll probably see is that before that can be done, some House members will express their allegiance to the Patriot Party even while they're still members of the Republican Party. And so they will run with Trump's backing until that party is completely established and formed state by state. But it does give the ability for Trump to begin to fundraise on behalf of that political party. There's people on the local and state level that will begin to run under that banner. And it's interesting. I'm sure many of these people have monitored online messages and comment boards because there's a whole host of people that have indicated support for a Patriots Party. I've seen it in Kansas who said that they're ready to jettison the Republican Party.
So I think to answer that question, he starts the Patriot Party, but that's a long play. And Trump has no discipline to play the long game. So he'll let people lend his name and stuff and get that. But to me, Trump's natural place is a podcast. Hour and a half, 2-3 times a week.
He can just ramble on.
Free ranging, have a whole bunch of guests to ask you stuff. That to me, that's I think where he might go.
You don't think he still tries to start his own news network, create his own media conglomerate?
You gotta have billions of dollars to do that. I don't know if anybody is going to be hip to get in bed in business with Trump. I mean, let's face it. Trump could start a podcast with the awesome setup that we have in this office today, and 50 million people a week would listen to it. So I think
he could fundraise through that.
And he could massively fundraise through that. So I think he'll start the Patriot Party, but that's a little bit of a longer
for the
down
news
the road.
cycle.
But he's got to have an immediate influence on the news cycle, and the best way for him to do it is start the Trump Network, start with a podcast, and see what happens.
So does he not care about the visual?
I think he 100% cares about it. Yeah, it would have to be.
So he films it and it's simulcast on YouTube or something?
It would be done in a studio and professionally and stuff like that. He's not going to emulate the 2-minute-in-the-middle equipment we have, but what I'm saying is that would give him complete control. He could be on the phone watching TV, get pissed, call in and say, "Fire it up, I'm and go." Yeah. So I think he needs something that gives him he needs something where he is the only star. He is the complete center of the stage, and he can, whenever he wants, whatever he needs, he can just spit out. And I think a podcast on that would be the way to go.
You might have it, Craig.
Well, I'm going to send him an email and see if he can come on here. I send people emails all the time. I send CNN emails about stories they run, asking them for clips and stuff. Nobody's ever replied to me yet, but I figured I'll still give it a shot. So why don't we end with, we always try to end with something positive, something happy. Jason, you put out a Minute Pod this week about 5 reasons that you can still be optimistic. And I liked it because it was at the big level, at a macro level, there are things happening. If you had to pick one of them, what's the one thing you want people to say, here's something you can feel good about in 2021?
I think the global reduction in extreme poverty. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you're in the bottom of the bottom, you're never going to get that. And it's been The data is tremendous as an example of how much the lives of many, many millions has improved just in recent history. And it gives you some hope that the tiny amounts of foreign aid that the U.S. does, which if you poll somebody outside
it's
and say
minuscule,
they'd guess it's more than 10%. It's less than 1%. Less than 1%, and how beneficial it is, how utilitarian it is, how it improves. And you know what? If you are the recipient of $1 of that aid, and it's not an actual dollar, right? Maybe it's a wheat or medicine or shelter or something, and it's got the flag on there, or it's got "Made in the USA" on there.
Yeah.
There's no better marketing for the United States. There's no better example of what we could do to improve the common good.
And I love how you pointed out, sometimes it's weird groups of people that get things done, like Bush, Bono, and Gates.
Yeah.
I mean, those people, there's no logical reason they should be hanging out together.
Yeah.
I remember seeing something where Bush said they were going to introduce him to Bono, and he's like, is that the person who sings with Cher? He had no idea who he was, but it took like one meeting, and he's like, I'm in, whatever you need. And people like to bag on Bush. He certainly has done a lot, but the people of Africa love George Bush, and they should.
17 million lives.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Direct to him.
And the fact that it was bipartisan too, back when we had this thing called compassionate conservatism, and we could get things done, and you could pass something that influenced so many people for such good.
I would just like to see a president feel passionate about something again that's just not political, and say, America, we need to do it just because it's the right thing to do. And we say, yeah, that's cool. Yeah. We should do that. Brandon, is there anything positive happening right now, politically, socially, economically, that you gravitate to?
So, yes. So in the area of COVID vaccines, so one positive thing is you have the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is going to be released shortly, and it has an advantage over the others in that it's a one-dose vaccine. So it makes it easier in terms of inoculation. But the bigger kind of news that came this week, which is still fairly recent and most people hadn't heard of it, is that University of California Irvine scientists are developing a vaccine that would protect against all SARS-CoV variants, including the common cold. Wow. And so they've been working on this for a long time. And so they're at the ability to start testing it on people. They've already been working talks with the Biden administration to get it approved rather quickly. And the delivery mechanism is also innovative because it would be through a patch, like a smoking patch, which means that you can mail it out to the individuals. And so the distribution would be much more quicker.
That's the kind of innovation we need. Yeah. So the state that's doing the best with coronavirus vaccination is West Virginia. And everyone's like, that doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense. West Virginia is full of poor people who depend on public health, and they are used to standing in lines and being told what to do and where to get stuff. And that's why because they have a bigger public health infrastructure and a larger population that uses it, that means they can get the vaccine out faster. My home state, the great state of Missouri, is dead last because we have a governor who's just some ding-a-ling from the boot hill who really doesn't care.
Well, he's kind of like a bumbling governor. He just kind of bumbles along.
He's a bumpkin. I mean, that's what he is. He's proud of it. He says it. It is what it is. At this pace, and with Missouri, maybe by the end of the year we can get this done. And maybe next week we can talk about. We have an odyssey this week to try to get my mother-in-law her first injection. It has been a disaster from start to finish, and I don't think it's actually going to happen next week. So as we get into this, there's going to be a whole bunch of stories surface around how difficult this actually is going to be. Yeah, unfortunately.
Last bit of good news on the same topic. The CDC announced this week that there does not seem to be any evidence that correlates extreme coronavirus spreading from children, and it recommends they all get back to school as soon as possible.
I heard that as well. That's very good news.
Please.
Yeah. Yeah, just a consistent school schedule would be.
I think parents are going to be breaking out champagne at that news.
Yeah, I wish that I had already heard from our friends in Blue Valley around that one, but not yet.
Everything about parent is routine. How can you establish a routine, get in a routine, and for God's sake, stay on routine? anything that helps keep that routine back has got to be good.
Well, one of the local school districts said that they might get kids back in school in April or late April. And I'm like, well, if they're going to just be back for a month, what's the point? Like,
there's so much data right now on how detrimental it is to kids who've been at home. Yeah. I mean, the mental side of the hospitals are filled up. There's all kinds of suicide watch, and it's really bad. And we'll find out.
And psychologically, social, relational skills that you lose out on being at home.
Oh, yeah.
You can't replicate that.
Your parents aren't your friends.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Getting picked on at school is something every kid needs to go through. There's no substitute for that.
There's no lunchroom dynamic at my house.
That's right. It's a crucible for your kid that they just have to figure out their own way through. You can't help them. You shouldn't help them. You can't. How would you recreate that in class, or at home, like at 11:30 every day? I'm just going to walk by and throw something off your bed, and we'll just call it that way. So let's end on that one. I think that's our hour. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.